Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans, about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. My name is Larry Zoliak. I'm the Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat and your host for the Welcome Home podcast. Today's episode is about the healing power of fishing. And we have a couple of fishing experts with us today. We have Alborn, who is actually the fishing guide, our staff fishing guide here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run. And we have Beau Beasley, who's the author of two acclaimed, widely read fishing books here, Fly Fishing Virginia and Fly Fishing Mid-Atlantic. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Larry. Good to be here.
Al, I want to just start with you real quick and just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into fishing and how you became our guide here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Well, Beau, I'm 22 years regular Army, half of it spent around the world in Europe and Asia. And when I got out, like a lot of vets, I had my own baggage and wandered by an Orvis store, picked up my first fly rod and reel. He pointed me to the Blue Ridge backcountry, and that was about 1990, and I've been fishing ever since.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, it's not about the fishing. But anyway, it's a good way to get your mind off things and move on.
Yeah. Okay. And so you found out about the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Yeah, it was a kind of an evolution. I spent some time as a Project Healing Waters guide, another great program. And, of course, you are the one that put the Warrior Retreat on my radar and said, well, why don't you teach our folks how to fly fish? And so it's been a few years taking out families and friends and a mutually beneficial project.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, Beau, you've fished with a lot of warriors, and I know from just what the warriors say about what it means to them to go fishing when they're here. I know it's very relaxing and calming for them. But what's your experience been when you've been out with warriors fishing, taking them out, doing some fly fishing, or any kind of fishing, really? What's it been like for you to be able to guide those warriors out there and instruct them on how to do it?
Well, I would agree with Al that most people that go fishing or fly fishing are not there to catch fish. They're there to have an experience in the outdoors. I have been a lifelong angler, and like most people, I started fishing with a little Zebco rod or a cane rod and a bobber and a piece of worm, right? I can still remember my father taking me fishing. I can close my eyes right now, and in my mind's eye, I see my father's old blue Ford pickup truck where he used to take us out fishing together at a farm pond. And as life went on and I got older, I eventually went to work for Fairfax County Fire Department, where I eventually served for 30 years. And when I was at work one day, I ran a call with an elderly gentleman that got stung by a bee at Burke Lake. And I wasn't even supposed to be there that day. I happened to be detailed. And I got this older gentleman in the back of the mobile intensive care unit that I was the paramedic in charge of, and he was having some irregular heartbeats, and I convinced him to go to the hospital, and he really didn't want to go. And I said, well, listen, let's just go, and then we'll rule out the fact that there's anything else. And I said, were you out here fishing? He said, no, I'm just out here walking around Burke Lake, but I do fish. I fly fish. And I said, wow, I've always wanted to learn how to fly fish. And, of course, we're on our way to the hospital, and the sirens are going, and the lights going, and we're weaving in and out of traffic. And this gentleman said to me, son, can I ask you a question? I said, yes, sir. He said, do you golf? I said, no, sir, I don't golf. He said, good, son, because you can't afford to golf and fly fish. And the gentleman was named Bob Guess. And I eventually became really good friends with Bob. And I just mentioned that I always wanted to learn how to fly fish, but I didn't know anything about it. And he said, well, why don't I give you my phone number and we'll go fly fishing together? And I said, well, I don't know if I can get your phone number and call you later and go fly fishing with you. I to be really transparent, I don't know what the fire chief would think about that. And he said, well, are you going to tell him? I'm not going to tell him. And I said, okay. So I got his phone number. Sure enough, 3 days later, we're right back at Burke Lake. We go out on a little John boat, and I caught my first bluegill on a popping bug, which is a surface water fly that makes a popping sound, thus the term popping bug. And the fish hear that sound, and they feel the vibrations, and they're attracted to it. They think it's an insect struggling on the water, and they came over and caught, ate that popping bug. And what I did not know for a long time, I became close friends with Bob Guess, and he was the namesake of a company called Mr. Bob's Lucky Day Lures, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was a very famous popping bug maker, one of the best known ones in the country. I had no idea who I was out fly fishing with, and eventually we became good friends, and he asked me to take him to a fly fishing event up in New Jersey. And he said, if you drive me, I'm too old to drive up to New Jersey, but if you drive me, I'll pay for everything. I just need you to drive me. So on one of my days off, I got in his van and took him up to New Jersey, and we went to a big fly fishing show up there, and I noticed that people noticed who this guy was and took note of him when we walked around. I thought, man, it's really odd. And I did not find out until much later that he was very well known. And I tease people and say, look, when I got into fly fishing, it's like you wander out onto the golf course and you don't know what you're doing. And you're just swinging a club around, and some guy comes over and says, hey, can I give you a hand? And you become this guy's golf buddy, and your golf game gets much better. And he tells you at the end of the day that his name is Arnold, but you don't know that you're whacking balls with Arnold Palmer, right? And that's the way it was with Bob. I just knew it was Bob. I didn't know it was Bob Guess. And he took me under his wing, and that's how I got involved. And just like Al, it's all through experience, right? You don't know what you don't know. And probably the biggest misconception, I'm sure Al would agree with this, the biggest misconception in fly fishing is it's super expensive and it's super hard. And neither one of those things is true. It can be very inexpensive, and all you need really is somebody like Al to take you under his wing and teach you how to cast, and that's the easy part. And fly fishing, I tell people all the time, fly fishing is to traditional fishing what archery is to traditional hunting. Archery, they're not better hunters, they're just different than the guys using rifles and shotguns. Fly anglers are not better anglers. There's got nothing to do with being better. It's just a different approach. That's all.
Yeah, and I know, you also have the Virginia Fly Fishing Show, or the Virginia Show, and I've seen the joy, especially with the fly tying that warriors will do at the show, and even involving kids and family. It's really, really something. But I just wonder, what's your fondest memory of fishing with a warrior?
Well, there have been quite a lot, actually. I remember probably one of the most poignant. I got into fly fishing, as I said, through Bob Guess, through a 911 call that I ran. And I found that the more I fly fished, the less I was stressed out. And when you're on a mobile intensive care unit and your average day, just your average workaday day, is 2 car wrecks, a stroke, and a heart attack, that's a pretty typical day. That can grind on you, particularly if it's in the middle of the night. And we work 24-hour shifts in Fairfax County, so we'd usually be at the station by 6:30 in the morning, and you didn't leave until 6:30 or 7 the next morning. And if you got 3 calls, you ran 3 calls. If you got 13 calls, you ran 13. So I just use fly fishing as a form of escape, and I think that's what most people do. And you mentioned the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival, and we do have a lot of fly tyers there. I think people like tying flies because, again, it's something they can escape. It's an art form. It's something they can do. And it's particularly good for people with traumatic brain injuries, because people with traumatic brain injuries often suffer from cognitive skills. They can't concentrate for long periods of time. They have eye-hand coordination issues. And fly tying, you literally get a recipe, just like you're cooking a cake or you're cooking a pizza or you're making a pie. Here's how you make this particular pie. Well, guys and gals, we have plenty of women in fly fishing, learn how to tie a specific fly, whether it's a grasshopper or a elk hair caddis or a big deer hair bass bug. Different recipes make different flies, and I think people like the art form, and most people are surprised to find out that some of the best and first well-known fly tyers were women. Mabers Orvis being one of them, and I just think people like it, again, because they can do it at home. Right now, I don't tie. I don't have the skill to do that. I can barely tie my shoes, so I don't tie flies at all. But I know guys that are really, really good at it, and they practice it, and they can do it at home. And one of my memorable. You ask a memory about a warrior. There was a Marine that I knew that came back from Vietnam, and he said he had been back a couple of days, and the guy knocked on his door, and great big burly fella came in and said, "We're going to tie flies." And he says, "Well, what are you talking about?" "We're going to tie flies." And the guy said, "I knew nothing. I didn't have any idea what he was talking about." And this person's name is Bob Popovics, who's a well-known fly tyer and an author in the fly fishing community, widely respected. And he was a Marine. And he said, "Beau, I was not expecting this guy. I didn't know anything about it. He just showed up, and we started tying flies together. And I cannot tell you what it did to make me feel a lot calmer." And I've had multiple veterans tell me that, some people think that, if I have a pain or if I hurt somewhere, I can just take a pill and make it go away. Well, you may in the short term, but in the long term, that's not a really good form of therapy. So most of the veterans I know not only tie flies because they like fishing them, but because they do that oftentimes in lieu of taking medication. I want to be clear. I'm not advising you to go against your doctor's wishes and tie flies instead of taking medicine. That's not what I'm saying. But what I can say is categorically, I've lost count of how many veterans I have spoken to who have said they use fly fishing to help them deal with their fly tying, to deal with stress, and to quite honestly deal with pain management, where they're concentrating on a particular thing. And it's an art form, and there's a real sense of accomplishment.
Well, it's a great way to become grounded when you are stressed out and you start to feel like things might be spiraling, you're so intensely focused, because it is really small, tight work, that I could see where, it just helped you be grounded for sure. Al, I remember one of the first times we went out with a family, and we went over here to the Boy Scout camp, and they were pulling out fish out of there that had to have been 4 inches long, and they were just thrilled. You could barely see the fish in the warrior's hand when he was holding it, but he was just thrilled to death. And I think, I'm sure you have some great memories of the times you took warriors out.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, every family's different. Had families from a couple to mom and dad and 4 or 5 kids out at both the Boy Scout pond and a private pond we use within a mile of the facility here. That's the whole goal, is to get families and friends together on an activity, which is fly fishing. And my memory always goes around the methodology. I try to teach them in a very short period of time how to tie flies, simple flies, and to do that as a family, even the kids as young as 9 or 10, and then how to work a rod. And then the goal is to have them catch a fish on a fly they tied. So when they walk away, I've given the family something they can bond around. Moms and dads, as the boys and girls, fly fishing, an activity to prepare for that together, and then a reason for road trips. And I usually close every session with referring them either to Project Healing Waters or Trout Unlimited. Both are great veterans programs. Trout Unlimited is free for the first year for veterans. But bring a family together. The fondest memory is of a dad, and he had 3 or 4 kids, and his wife was there. And what I could see was him spending time with his kids on the water with a fly rod, just the kids. He didn't really care about fishing, and it had nothing to do with the fish. It's probably a very intimate father-child instance that's hard to replace, and I hope they leave using fly fishing to maintain that intimacy in the future.
So to be clear, too, I think a lot of people, their impression of fly fishing is that there's a rather steep learning curve. But with you take them out and you teach them a type of Japanese fly fishing, which I always mispronounce. But
Tenkara, which means from the heavens. I teach both Japanese and Western, but if I want to get somebody on the water quickly, I go with Tenkara. The elevator story of Tenkara is it's a rod, a line, and a fly. And it's simple fly fishing. Yvonne Chenard's our evangelist of simple fly fishing. So I teach them how to tie something called a kibiri, which is the simplest fly on the planet. The Japanese tie them out of things they find around the house. And Beau was right that fly fishing really isn't expensive, and Tenkara is the cheapest entry point. They often migrate up to Western. But the Japanese understand that all fish really are looking for is something that looks like a bug, and that's what a kibiri is. And with a fixed line fly rod and a fixed length of line, which is usually about 12 feet, I can get them casting and catching fish in about 15 minutes if there are fish out there.
yeah, which is, you have a limited time with a family that's only here for a week, and this is one of their off-site activities. So the idea of trying to get them, Western fly fishing is just really not going to.
At one point, I'm also a Boy Scout fly fishing merit badge counselor, and that's Western fly fishing. And as Beau said, it's not that hard. Now, the issue is with both Tenkara and Western fly fishing, there's big business in making it hard. But if you just want to teach somebody to fish with a fly rod and gear, it's not that hard.
Yeah, I tell people that, I tell most people, if I ask you to close your eyes and say, hey, close your eyes and tell me what a fly angler looks like. 30 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, they would have described an English professor in a tweed jacket smoking a pipe, fishing for brook trout in the mountains. And what most people don't know, most people are shocked to find out you can fly fish for nearly anything. So there's a big saltwater fly fishing community, and people are shocked when I tell them that. Fly rods is what most of fly fishing is based around. People buy different rods. Then I tell people that fly rods are identical to vehicles. And what I mean by that is you can buy a Volkswagen or you can buy a Maserati. You can buy a pickup truck or you can buy a dump truck. They're both going to cost different amounts, and the question is all, how do you want to get there? So I would recommend to somebody, if they don't know anything at all about fly fishing and they want to get involved, I agree with Al 1,000%. If there's a Trout Unlimited chapter they can get hooked up with, that's a great opportunity. And Trout Unlimited, its members fish for all kinds of fish. It's just Trout Unlimited is primarily concerned with cold water conservation. They're actually a conservation organization. They're not a fly fishing club. The other one I would recommend people, if they're in warmer climates, to try the Federation of Fly Fishing, which they fly fish for anything. But you normally see them in larger areas where warm water is prevalent. because they don't have cold water streams like in Texas. Federation of Fly Fishers is really big in Texas. It's also very big out west. And the other thing is to get hooked up with some kind of club or organization that can teach you some of the basics, and you can buy an entry-level package, right? You could probably spend $200 and get rod, reel, line, and a couple of flies. And I would recommend people start out simple. Don't walk in and start out with, well, I'm going to buy a $500 fly rod.
Right.
Because currently I have a $200 fly rod, and if I buy a $500 fly rod, I'm going to be twice as good as I am now. You can buy a $10,000 car and then buy a $20,000 car. You're the same driver. You didn't get automatically better because you got a more expensive car. So I would just say to people, the biggest thing is getting hooked up with somebody that knows something about fly fishing. And Lefty Cray, who is probably the best known fly angler in the world, said to me, Beau, there's only two kinds of people in fly fishing, and only two. Those that show their knowledge and those that share their knowledge. And you want to be around the latter and avoid the former like the plague. So I would just say, if you get into fly fishing and you run across somebody who thinks he knows everything or thinks she knows everything, probably time to go find somebody else. Most people that I know, and I am fortunate enough to know some of the best guys in the industry and authors of multiple books. I'm thinking of people like Pat Dorsey and guys like that are very approachable. Tom Rosenbauer, Blaine Chocolate. They're authors of George Daniel, and there's many that I'm probably leaving out, but they're just normal people. And they like fly fishing, and they want to show people how to fly fish, and they're very approachable. So if a veteran came here and they wanted to learn how to fly fish, going out with somebody like Al is perfect because he knows a lot, but he's going to come across as a very average guy, and that's his secret to teaching people because they're not intimidated, right? They don't have to perform. They're learning a basic casting stroke, and, once they catch a fish, it's game over, right? I remember the first time I caught a bluegill with Bob Guess, I remember thinking to myself, I almost said this out loud, I have never done drugs in my life. I cannot imagine being more high on cocaine than I was high when I caught that big bluegill on a 4-weight. It was just, it was like having lightning on your line, It was... we have a saying in the fly fishing community, the tug is the drug. And what they mean is feeling that fish fighting back really, pardon the pun, gets you hooked. Do you agree, Al?
Absolutely. And, Beau, you brought up golf before. There's an interesting analogy. I used to golf. People think they can buy a better game by spending more on clubs. Fly fishing is the same thing. People think that they can buy a better cast by buying the most expensive rod, and that's not the case at all.
I agree with you 100%. They'd be far better off buying an entry-level rod and then paying somebody to give them a casting class.
Touche.
Because here's the deal. People say, well, I don't know about fly fishing. It seems kind of expensive. If they learn how to cast well enough to catch a fish, they're going to come up with the money. Trust me. And it's like anything else. It's like any other sport, whether it's skiing or as Al mentioned, golf, or quite frankly, quilting. The more you get into it, the more you get out of it. And I would just say you just need somebody to teach you the basics and have them take you under their wing. And that's what makes the difference. In fly fishing, it really helps to have somebody disciple you. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned. You said, can you tell me one of the most memorable experiences you ever had with a veteran? I was out on a Project Healing Waters event out in Idaho. And I had just started writing a book about Project Healing Waters, which is a nonprofit organization that helps veterans that may be suffering from physical or emotional or mental disabilities or injuries as a result of their service, and they use fly fishing to help get them a little more integrated and to feel more like they're part of a team. And I was at this event. I was pretty much the only non-veteran there, and at the time I had a super short haircut. Very military-looking haircut, which was quite common in the fire department. And they were going around, everybody was introducing themselves, and they were saying, hey, I'm Bob, I served in the Marine for 10 years, and then there was a soldier and a sailor and then an airman, a couple of airmen actually. And then eventually they got around to me, and I was like super self-conscious because I realized I'm not in the military, but I got a military haircut. These guys are all going to think I'm in the military, and I was really uncomfortable. I'm kind of kicking the ground, and finally they get to me, and I told them my name, and that at the time I was a lieutenant with Fairfax County Fire Department. And one of the guys kind of looked at me, and he walks over and he puts his arm around my shoulder, and he goes, "It's okay, man." He said, "You're just like one of us, except you serve at home." Mm-hmm. And I got really choked up, and I said, "No, I'm not like you. Nobody's shooting at me at work. Mm-hmm. And when I go to work, I'm going to come home in 24 hours. If it's a really long day, I'm going to come home in 36 hours. If there's a freak snowstorm and for some reason I have to be there, I might be there for 2 days. I don't get deployed for 6 months at a time, so no, I'm not like you." Mm-hmm. But the welcoming attitude they had a profound impact on me. And the joy of fly fishing that Al was talking about, it wasn't that the father was there fly fishing as much as it was he was there with his children and his wife, mm-hmm. having a meaningful time on the water and creating a great memory. Mm-hmm. And fly fishing allows me to create great memories and to be around people that I really like. One of my role models is a female guide named Kiki Gavin, and Kiki likes to say it's all about the hang, meaning it's all about hanging out with the people that have a similar passion. And when we get separated in our life, like in the fire department, if you're not careful, you can really isolate yourself. Mm-hmm. Fire department's the only job I know where we refer to everybody else as civilians. We even refer to the military as civilians. That's how kind of myopic we are, right? There's either firefighters or you're not. Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot of middle ground, right? We joke in the fire department, if the fire department had wanted you to have a wife, they'd have issued you one in rookie school, right? They want you to be dedicated to the job. Well, in the military, you're part of a unit and you're part of a team, and a pretty elite team, I might add. And if they get injured or somehow get separated from service due to an illness or an injury or some other issue, they're isolated. And Project Healing Waters and organizations like that help you get more in tune with other people that you have a lot in common with. Mm-hmm. And I can be anywhere, and I've done this numerous times. If I see somebody with a fire department T-shirt on, it doesn't matter where, even if they're from Virginia, much less Fairfax County, right? And I walk right up to them. 99 times out of 100, I look right at them and go, "Engine or truck?" And they know I'm asking them, "Are you on a fire engine or are you on a hook and ladder truck?" Mm-hmm. Right? And if they say, "I was on a truck," I always respond with, "Well, that's a shame you couldn't read and write. You could have been on an engine," because there's this camaraderie and we all. I joke with all my police friends. If you gotten 10 points higher on the entrance exam, you could have gone to work for the fire department. So that camaraderie is part of the fly fishing community too, because they have their own subcultures, believe it or not. Guys that fly fish that are just Tenkara guys, or guys that just fly fish for trout. I know guys that specialize in nothing but saltwater. They wouldn't turn their head around to catch a trout. But if there's a red drum to catch, or a speckled sea trout, or a striped bass, they're all over it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it all comes down to what you like.
So, Al, I remember one of the times that I went out with you and Warrior. One of my favorite was when we first went down to John Obremski's pond.
Yeah.
and it was with Captain Teresa Rear. And she was a very special guest here, one of our favorite. Severely injured in Afghanistan, came to us for that stay. She was in a wheelchair, starting to use a walker. We needed to find a place where she could fish. She said the two things she wanted to do was shoot and fish. And so we got her out with Frank out at Golden Seal, and he spent 4 hours with her, kneeling next to her wheelchair, walking her through because of the PTS. She was very reluctant to fire. Eventually, she did take 2 shots and dead on bullseyes, and she was done. So that was a great time. But then came to fishing, and we found that place, and it's a wonderful pond, catch and release down there. But she was so happy to be out fishing, and it wasn't until we briefed her out on that Wednesday that we learned that those 2 things were things that she did with her father when she was younger, and she wanted to make sure that the people that injured her didn't take that from her, which we thought was really, really moving and important to her. We made it important to us, and we actually found that location which was suitable for people with mobility issues, and great fish in there. They're really big compared to the Boy Scout camp. So it really didn't feel like you were catching a fish and not a I don't know what those little
great hosts too, and creating those one-time memories are part of what, well, we all try to do that work with veterans, especially and their families, something that perhaps replaces or mitigates the worst memories they might have. The chance, particularly when families get together. I mean, we know that the retreat specializes in warriors who have injuries that take a long time, 12 to 18 months to heal. And that families get put up in those tiny guest houses nearby, and the only time they get is structured time. That's why the warrior retreat is so important, because it gives them a break, maybe halfway through, where they get out of that tiny apartment and the structured visits of Walter Reed or Bethesda, the 2 places I go to, totally away. In this facility I'm sitting in now, which is a breath of fresh air, and the acres that surround it. But my job is just to be part of that, to get them totally in a unique bubble of strictly family, with an activity they can share, an activity they can take away, skills they can learn and apply for a lifetime, so that those kids might someday replicate the story you just told and say, well, I want to keep doing what my father taught me on Abrimsky's Lake.
Yeah, it's a great program, and we're just so happy to have you as the staff fishing guide, and I mean, the warriors love it. I know Teresa talked about it for quite a while after her stay, but really, it's just one of the activities that we have here, but I think it's one of the more important ones, because it gets the family and the warrior out in nature, which, as you say, they're restricted to the hospital for years, and just appointment after appointment, and then being able to come out here and stay for a week and do an activity like fly fishing or just fishing with somebody who's knowledgeable, somebody who has the equipment, somebody who can teach them what they need to know to make it a valuable experience, is really one of the special things that we have going here. So I want to thank you both for coming, sitting in, and telling us a little bit about the healing power of fishing, which I really believe in. I've seen it, our experience with the warriors, and what it meant to them to be involved in it. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all of our listeners. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.